on mic today, we have Ian Ferguson. How are you doing, my good sir?
Good. How's it going, Aaron?
It is going great. You are known most widely for your work on the Completely Unnecessary podcast, and I could talk to you about that alone all day, but you've got two other projects in the work now, as if you didn't have enough on your plate. You've got the Yokoi Kids project about Game Boy and Game Boy related media, and you've got Extra Napkins, a new podcast as well.
Correct.
I find both of those really interesting.
Thanks. So the Completely Unnecessary podcast, of course, started with Pat Contri at this point over 6 years ago. It's kind of crazy to think that it's been going for that long. And we have our 200th episode is coming up sometime, I think, in February. Obviously, that's the number of episodes that we put out increased a lot more when we went weekly as opposed to bi-weekly. And then the Yokoi Kids is a project with a couple of my friends, mainly my friend Rick, and him and I both tend to gravitate more towards just in our actual free time when we've got a few minutes to play games. We tend to gravitate towards the original Game Boy. He has a Game Boy Color. I have a couple black and white original Game Boys. So the idea was to just kind of cover games that were relatively inexpensive and, try to do things related to the games that weren't just straightforward reviews, whether it was write music or do art or something similar. And then the Extra Napkins podcast is the most recent one. I think we just recorded our 11th or 12th episode of that. In fact, I'll be recording another one of those today. And that is that's my friend John and I. I've known him since I was 14, and we've got an interesting history that maybe we'll get into in a little bit, but him and I will sit online when I'm at work and he's doing work and we have to kill time, and we'll just shoot the shit about food. We'll argue about food. We'll argue about fast food. We'll argue with other people about food. We'll talk about any sort of food in general. And we figured, why not just turn it into a podcast? He had wanted to do one, and I figured, yeah, it would be fun.
I can definitely see that. And I found that in my own life, talking about food and for some reason arguing about food gets people whipped up into a passion that it really is equaled only by things like politics and Star Wars. I mean, it's just one of those things that it pushes that button.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's like politics, Star Wars, religion, food. The nice thing about food is, I think one of the things that's great about talking about food and being passionate about food is, at least if you're doing it with someone who's what's the word I'm looking for? Who's got an even keel. It's a way to get that passion that you have when you're arguing about something like politics out in a harmless way. Mm-hmm. People feel just as strongly about the things they eat, the memories associated with food, the comfort, as they do other things, whether it be, like I said, religion, politics, something along those lines. Yet at the end of the day, you're just talking food. And I think most people realize that you can walk away from a food conversation and still be friends pretty easily. It's something silly that people like to argue about as passionately as they do more important things, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I can agree with that. I was showing on Twitter, for some reason, the observation came to me that, okay, full disclosure, I do not like mushrooms. I don't.
Geez. All right. That's fine. I'll let it slide.
No, see, but I bet you something that went through your head was, because this is what I get from everybody. If I say that, you've just never had them cooked right, let me make them for you. No, actually, I wouldn't do that with mushrooms. I would never tell someone who doesn't like mushrooms that I can cook them properly, because I realize mushrooms, for some people, it's what they are. I mean, it's a fungus. For some people, it's, it's the look, it's the texture. I do have a food like that, though. Anyone who tells me they don't like eggplant, I will tell them
You just haven't had it cooked properly.
Mm-hmm.
Mushrooms, I tend to let people who don't like mushrooms slide by. I love them. I freaking love mushrooms, but I wouldn't really ever try to convince someone otherwise, I think, on mushrooms.
I find it curious that somebody, when I tell them I don't like something, their first reaction is, I want to cook it for you. If I say I like bacon cheeseburgers, they don't rush to make me a bacon cheeseburger. But something I don't like, they can't wait to make me.
It's true. I think that just comes from, I would imagine that the people who say that to you are probably cooks in their own right, or people who enjoy cooking. So, we do. It happens to me sometimes too, admittedly. We get lost in ourselves. We get a little ego about it, and we just assume that, if someone doesn't like something, well, we can be the person who changes that for them.
And break it up. Okay, there you go. We're back. And it gets to be even more bizarre when it's something that, we can literally eat off the same plate, and I can have the most wonderful experience in the world, and you can think this is garbage.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. That's how human senses work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, there's taste involved, but there's also things like, I think preconceived notions about food going into it are going to affect that as well. For instance, when it comes to barbecue, I like barbecue that is, I like dry rub. I'm not a huge fan of sauce. And anytime I sit down to try, something that is, say, a barbecue with a sauce, I'm probably going to enjoy it a little bit, but I'm always going in with this preconceived notion that I'm not going to like it. So it's going to affect how I taste that and how I react to it. People also tend to get, this is actually something we were talking about on the CU podcast just recently. People tend to get attached to brands. So say that you're really into, say, In-N-Out is your favorite cheeseburger. A lot of people in California love In-N-Out. You're probably going to go into trying any new cheeseburger that someone tells you is better with, I don't know, a chip on your shoulder, with a little bit of bias against it. I don't know that we ever taste things, as we get older, as we get further in life. I don't think we ever taste things without influence or without bias.
True enough. I mean, when I lived on the East Coast, I had all sorts of places I would go for a burger here and there, and then I moved to the Midwest, and suddenly I found Whataburger, and it was like, okay, this is the burger. I mean, at least as far as fast food goes.
Whataburger's good, and that was actually the one I was thinking of when I mentioned In-N-Out, because it always seems that there is, it always seems to come down to those two that people have really, really strong feelings for. Both are definitely institutions, and I think a lot of it has to do with it was regional too. You had In-N-Out for a long time was a California thing. Whataburger for a long time was a Texas thing. Both of those states generate a lot of pride in the people who live there or who are from there. You don't hear a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm from Wyoming. Or I'm from Wisconsin or something like that, the Y states. But people who are from California tend to be proud that they live in California. They're from there. Same with Texas. So when you have a Texas burger or a California burger, and I've had both, and both are good, it's easy to become extra attached to it because of what it represents or where it's from.
And I will just say, I'm an Atari Age member. On a couple of occasions, I believe you promised me a sandwich.
Yes, I own numerous Atari Age member sandwiches.
So on the topic of sandwiches, do you know Firehouse Subs?
Yes, I do. We have them in San Diego.
All right. I didn't know if they were that far west. It's by far the best chain sandwich I could possibly think of.
So I really like Firehouse. As far as a chain goes, I definitely enjoy them. There is a chain out here, though, that there's one in Vegas, but other than that, I think it's more or less California based. Ike's Sandwiches. It's Ike's Sandwich Company, and the franchises are called Ike's Love and Sandwiches. They make the same stuff. It's just one is corporate owned, one is franchisee owned. Those are really good. And I tend to frown upon chain sandwiches. I'd rather go to like a local deli or something like that. But Firehouse and Ike's are both sandwich chains that I actually like pretty well.
Don't know Ike, so I can't comment on that. I for years, every time you say we'll buy him a sandwich, it's like, does he know about Firehouse? Because
yeah, that's a good one. That's definitely a good one. Anything that's not Subway.
Yeah, I was a Subway fan, huge back in the day. You know, when I was a teenager, I loved Subway, but it's not that they got bad, but there were so many better options that sprang up around them that now I tried it and it's like, what am I here for?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. When I was younger, it was, especially like growing up in Western New York where there weren't a ton of delis everywhere. It was an alternative to fast food. You know, it was something that was different than a burger. But when you move someplace where there's delis every couple of corners, and, you know, there's more sandwich chains coming out, it's hard to go back to something like Subway. Subway is, I always say it's not even that it tastes bad. It's the most tasteless food I think I've had from a restaurant. All the subs taste the same. You could give me a BMT, you could give me a bologna, you could give me you know, just about anything they make, and it's all going to taste relatively similar.
If I have to find myself there, and I don't hate it per se, but there are cases like I'm in an airport, I'm in a mall, and it's just the best option out of what's there. The Subway melt with cold with just the bacon on top. I can still eat that the same way I did in high school. Sure. I'd still rather be at Firehouse, but you know what? If I'm there, I can take that home.
Right. Yeah. It's something that you can find on the menu and eat, which is important, I think, with any fast food restaurant, that there's something you can find, something you can eat, because you never know what's going to be on the side of the road when you need something, or in an airport, like you said.
So Yokoi Kids, not to change the subject too dramatically, but I've been thinking about that a lot ever since it started. I've been watching, following it, and I was asking myself, what is it about the Game Boy? Because for years we had the NES was like the crown jewel of retro gaming. That was what everybody was talking about. It was hot on the heels of the Atari 2600, which was the big one 10 years prior to that.
Right.
But Game Boy seemed weird because it was always like the weird stepchild of the NES when the NES was big. And if I finally clicked, and tell me if you agree, disagree, whatever, with the Game Boy and portable gaming, that was like the first time gaming went from being a social experience to you in your own little world and your own little device. It was personal.
Yeah, it's true. It very much is. And, you know, even if you look back then, there were multiplayer games, there were link cables, but I don't think that was ever really the main focus. And I remember that was actually, you know, kind of a prickly point initially with, you know, my younger brother and my parents when we got ours, was, you know, it wasn't with the NES. Even if if I was playing and my brother wasn't, he could easily watch what I was doing, you know, comment on what I was doing, join in, offer me suggestions. With the Game Boy, it very much is your own little thing. There's not a whole lot you can share when you're playing a Game Boy. But for me, I've always enjoyed that portable experience, because I get wrapped up in it. It feels very cozy. It's like, I don't know, it's like being it reminds me of wrapping myself up in a blanket and playing my Game Boy as a kid. And it's something that I still like about portable systems to this day, is it's my own experience. You know, there is no possibility for backseat gaming from someone else in the room. It's just what you're doing. I like that it's separate sometimes from the from the the big screen, from the social aspect of it. But I think another thing about the Game Boy that and I think it's a big thing now, part of the reason why especially the black and white era games are getting more popular again, is they're very, for the most part, I mean, obviously there's RPGs, but they're very self-contained experiences. They're very pick up, play for 15 minutes, and be done with them. Yokoi Kids this month is finally doing Kirby's Dream Land. Someone picked it, and it's a great game, and it's got cool characters, cool graphics, it's got unique levels, but the whole game wraps up in about 35 minutes if you know what you're doing, and you don't have you don't have too much trouble getting through the levels. And I think that's perfect. I think a lot of people, as we get older, we don't have time for games that have 2-hour tutorials, let alone 40 hours worth of gameplay. There's something nice about leaving a Game Boy on your table with a game in it that you like and being able to, pick it up, enjoy it for 10 minutes when you have the time, and then put it back down and not feel like you're, leaving too much of yourself in that game. Yeah,
and for sure, that whole wrapping yourself up in a blanket aspect, that was kind of what I was thinking of when I was getting into your personalized system. And I actually was thinking that, people like us playing these Game Boy games in 89, 90, 91, and our parents saying you're kind of off in your own little world there, you're not joining in with the rest of the crowd. And yet nowadays we've got everybody walking around with a smartphone that has their own apps and their own music and their own this and that. And it's like, we were so far ahead of that curve and we're just now figuring it out.
Yeah, I agree. That's very true. What started in 89 with the Game Boy, if you played video games, because it wasn't as big of a hobby then, has definitely reached out to, the whole world with smartphones. I don't drive, so I have a lot of time to, I walk around a lot. I use public transportation a lot, or, if I'm going somewhere with my wife and she's driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and I have a lot of time to just look out the window and people watch and pay attention to what's going on outside. And everyone walking down their street has their face in a smartphone, essentially doing what we were doing 20 years ago, 25 years, 30 years ago at this point. 30 years ago at this point. So.
And I'm glad that you're finally grabbing a handle on that, because it was always like the Game Boy was just glossed over when it came to even not only retro gaming. Back in the day, it was like the you got to take it with you Nintendo.
Yeah, I think people loved it, and there were definitely good games on it. Mm-hmm. But I do think when it was, I do think there was a period of time when it was relevant and current, and that goes all the way up to probably the Game Boy Color, it was still looked at as it's a portable system, but it's a lesser thing. It's not as good as the Genesis I have at home, or the Super Nintendo I have at home, or, what I'm playing on the PC. It's something that I'm using on the go. Because a lot of my friends, because even back then when I liked the Game Boy, a lot of my friends were like, well, it's not as good as this, that, or the next thing. I think now, a couple decades removed from its importance, with retro gaming being a big thing, I think it's easier to go back and look at it on its own merits, not as the portable brother or sister to, X, Y, or Z system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of perspective is really, really helpful when you look at that huge library, and especially factoring in the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, and if you feel the need to even branch out into the DS eras.
Yeah, I like all of them. I think the Game Boy Color itself has a pretty poor library, but I was at Long Island Retro Gaming this past summer, and an attendee gifted me a backlit Game Boy Advance. Not the SP, but like the original model. They had put a backlight in it. And it's really nice. And honestly, it's the first time in probably a decade I've had the ability to play Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. So it's been fun going back and finding some of the gems in a library that I never thought was particularly fantastic. There's definitely good stuff on the Game Boy Color. It's just by that point in time, there was a lot of shovelware, a lot of licensed stuff, that didn't really bring anything new to the table.
Yeah. I mean, I was a diehard Nintendo fan. I had my Game Boy within a couple months of it being released, and I held off on getting a color for various reasons because it's like, well, maybe when there's a game that I absolutely have to have, I will get one.
Sure.
And by the time that time came, the Game Boy Advance was out.
Right. Which is like the Game Boy Color game, so
yeah,
just get the Game Boy Advance.
That says something to me, is that whole system came and went before I found a real reason that I had to get one.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about games on the Game Boy Color specifically that I think were, particularly excellent, the Game Boy Color version of Dragon Warrior 3 is phenomenal. Super Mario Brothers Deluxe was at the time a very interesting thing because we still hadn't gotten quite to the point where you were taking original Nintendo games on the go. There was no those sorts of ports didn't really happen until the Game Boy Advance. So to be able to take something like Super Mario Brothers, they added a lot of the lost levels into there too. That was a good game. But yeah, I mean, I still struggle to think of maybe more than 5 or 10 games that were specifically Game Boy Color that would have made me buy that system. The Metal Gear is good on there, but that's tough to find. The Hamtaro game is actually really good on there. But yeah, it was like by the time they finally got color in the system, they had sort of run out of steam with what they were going to do for it.
What finally pushed me over the edge were the Oracle Nintendo Zelda games.
Sure.
And yeah. Later on getting the Blaster Master game for that era. It just, but I mean, that was a handful of games out of a huge, huge library.
Yeah, hundreds of them.
So are you have any major plans for these two projects? Do you have any goals as far as making the YouTube series, an extra podcast, or a book?
No, I don't generally have any. I try not to put any huge goals on it. I just want to see where Extra Napkins goes. Okay. Currently, our format is, we kind of just pick a topic and riff on it for about an hour. But at some point, we're going to have to start looking into, probably news articles, food trend articles, commenting on them. I wouldn't say that we'd ever become a food news podcast, but, that is something that we'll probably have to turn our attention to. We already did one episode at a Polish food festival. That's something that John and I definitely want to do more of, is going to festivals and covering them live. Or not live, but, covering them after the fact. We are actually, I don't know that we will. As a matter of fact, it's the day after I get back from the SoCal Retro Gaming Convention. But there is it's the World Pizza Convention or something like that in Vegas. So we actually put in for press passes. We'll see if we get them. I'm not expecting to get them, but John actually, worked covering events for local news for a long time. And he's like, they just kind of wave press passes through because almost no one applies for them. So we'll see. I think that's the big thing we want to do this year is try to focus more on festivals, food shows, and do a couple more road trips like we did just 2 weeks ago. We went up to LA and hit a bunch of places on the way up and down and have been covering those in the most recent episodes. So I think that's what we want to do with that. With Yokoi Kids, we kind of reached the goal with Yokoi Kids. We wanted to get to the point where there was enough people contributing to make the site worthwhile. And about 6 months into Yokoi Kids, I don't know if it was Rick says, he got a lot of signups after I had, pushed it on the Completely Unnecessary podcast. And we just got a huge influx of contributors. So we're kind of at that point now where we're getting enough entries. And we're happy where that is. More entries is always good, but I don't know that we are looking to really grow it necessarily. I think Rick and I have always had this idea that we might put out a couple of zines that are Yokoi Kids related, with a couple of because he does a lot of comic art. I write a lot. We would maybe do a couple of one-off print zines that were Yokoi Kids related, but yeah, nothing huge. No books in the works or anything like that.
Well, I actually think just having a website with good, solid content is actually really admirable, because we're kind of getting away from that on the internet, where everything's being pushed to social media and made into clickbait. And just to have some good, solid content about an interesting subject is something not enough people are doing.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. It's I've noticed that too. 15 years ago, I would load up whatever web browser I was using, Netscape probably at the time. And, there would be a list of 10 websites in my head that I would run down and check, every day when I would log on. And with the way social media is now and the way content is released, you're absolutely right. That doesn't really exist. I don't really check any websites anymore. I turn the internet on and I go to Twitter, and I may follow links to a couple of websites to read longer articles, but that's not really the thing. It's get yourself a social media presence and get yourself a Patreon and do videos and things like that. And I don't have any issues with Patreon or videos, but I'm not a person who prefers to gather his information from videos. I like to read articles. I like to look at pictures and things like that. So the whole YouTube generation, the whole YouTube boom, the whole quote unquote pivot to video has, more or less left me high and dry. It's not something that I find particularly interesting.
Yeah. If it's of any consolation, it does still exist, but it's a lot harder to find. And the people who maintain it aren't necessarily doing it the way that you and I would prefer it to be done. But I mean, people are still making these articles out there. You just have to look a little deeper.
Right.
And then, like say, you making Yokoi Kids, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here, is like, say, hey, this project is out there and it's worthwhile, but you may not finding it just opening up your Facebook feed. So, if you're a Game Boy fan, head out there.
Right. And so I do appreciate that. Yeah, it's people don't, get on the internet and go to Google and type in something that interests them anymore and then start following websites and then find communities that way. They find people they like to follow on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook that are knowledgeable about the topics they enjoy, and they follow, those people instead. Like I said, I have no issue with that. That's just not the way that I prefer to do it.
Wikpedia and the Internet Archive are kind of, I think, the last bastions of that old style internet information repository, because they'll link to those sites, the personal websites and the in-deep articles, and it's, like I said, it's still there, just not the main focus anymore.
Yeah, I think wikis in general are definitely sort of you make a good point there. I think that's sort of the extension of what we were talking about. You don't have, I mean, I'm sure you do, but unlike in 99, 2000, 2003, 4, 5, you're not going to a website that's all about the NES world or something, and then reading about it and learning your stuff from there. You're going to wikis and various, places like that cover all of the Nintendo games, or, you'll find a link in one and you'll just follow those links down a rabbit hole. It's similar. It's a little different. It's similar enough though. That's how I spend my evening, reading up on topics, is I just keep clicking links in a Wikipedia or a wiki of some sort until it's, 3 a.m. and I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about the YouTube rabbit hole and they can just be on there for hours. I can't. I mean, I'll spend 30 minutes on there and I'm done. But I hit Wikipedia and I type in something that interests me, and yeah, it's 3 a.m. when I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, they really are kind of two sides of the same coin. One is text and one is video and audio.
So, hey, I know that you're a busy guy and you probably got customers coming in later you got to get to, but if somebody wants to follow this information, want to check out Yokoi Kids or anything else, where can they find you on the internet?
So Yokoi Kids is I need to double check that because it's just a link. So let me find out. So you can find me at Pixelsicle, PXLSICLE, on Twitter. You can find Yokoi Kids on Twitter at Yokoi Kids, YOKOI KIDS. Extra Napkins is also on Twitter. It's at eNapkins. And then Yokoi Kids itself, the website, which is the more important thing, is yokoikids.wordpress.com.
Awesome. And I'm going to make sure all that gets into the show notes. So if somebody is just listening to this and can't write it down, my website will have everything on there.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to cover while we're here?
No, that's it. I think we covered it. Definitely check out Extra Napkins. Check out Yokoi Kids. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance that you probably already know about the Completely Unnecessary podcast, because that's where I think that's where I'm most well known from. And yeah, that's about that.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for being here. I would be glad to have you back anytime because you're a heck of a fun guy, and I just like picking your brain.
Thanks, man. Anytime.
Take good care. See you soon.